the Finance-Auditing Committee of May 22nd, 2025. And we have a roll call, please.
Thank you. Starting with Director Devlin.
Here.
Judah Chang.
Here.
Hernandez.
Here.
Maston.
Here.
Doney.
Here.
Vice Chair Parr.
Present.
Chair Rabbit.
Here.
And President Conran.
Here.
All right. 100% here. But we also have a committee of the whole. Also in the room, we have Directors Hill. And wait, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, there we go. We have 10. All right.
Perfect. We'll move on then to item number 3, which is the ratification of previous actions by the Auditor Controller. For reference, those start on page 5 through 28. The PFM report starts on page 9. And Monique here? She is. Thank you for being here, Monique. It's good to see you. Tell us definitively what is happening.
And make it positive.
Okay.
Even harder.
Well, good morning. I was frantically checking CNBC to make sure I didn't miss a tweet or a statement. But just some thoughts on where we sit today. I'm actually going to start on page 10 of your packet, which has the yield curve. I think a lot of what's going on is reflected in the volatility of the yield curve over the past 30 days. A couple of things. The Fed, as you know, met in May and held the federal funds target rate steady at its current range of 4.25% to 4.5%. And a couple of things that Chair Powell really emphasized in his comments is that the Fed is taking a wait-and-see approach to monetary policy. And what he means by that and what he really tried to emphasize is that there's a lot of expectation on what current fiscal policy will mean for the economy. And that expectation is rooted in fears about the tariff policy, what that means for prices, what that means for inflation, how businesses are going to adjust to the expected increase in the cost of production. We know that there has been some movement on some of the tariff policy, forward movement in talks with China, deals done with the UK. But one thing that is certain about the tariff policy is that the administration has made very clear that either way, we're looking at a floor of at least 10% tariffs. And what that means is that prices are expected to go up. Now, those price increases have not yet reflected in the data, which is why the Fed is taking the wait-and-see approach to policy. They essentially said that they're not going to be preemptive about that policy. And there's still some expectations on rate cuts later this year. And so if you look at the yield curve chart, you'll see that decline in April, and we've also seen some decline and bounce back from where we are today. And so a lot of volatility in the short-term market. The other side of the coin is the expected slowdown in growth. We have seen GDP numbers go negative. We've seen some expectation that you will see a slowdown, perhaps some increased unemployment, again, as businesses react to the higher cost of production. The big, beautiful bill, for lack of a better term, actually passed the House today, is expected to pass the Senate. And that, quite frankly, just means larger federal deficits. The U.S. debt has been downgraded by Moody's to AA1. That, quite frankly, has not necessarily been a big market mover. It made news, but quite frankly, I think Moody's is just catching up with Fitch and S&P, citing the same things that those rating agencies have cited: the federal deficit, the just dysfunction of the way we govern and treat the debt ceiling and things like that. And so there's a lot of angst in the market in terms of federal policy and what that means for Federal Reserve policy. Other things to note, not necessarily reflected in the area of the yield curve that we invest for the district, is that long-term rates have risen significantly. 30-year Treasury bonds are above 5% for the first time since about 2007. And again, that just reflects the outlook for inflation, the outlook for the economy over the long run, and again, investors' concerns about U.S. Treasury debt. Other things I want to point out in your packet, I'm going to move towards 12, which is, the Fed's job in terms of managing employment. And again, the forecast is that unemployment is going to increase over the short run. A lot of that has to do with folks, again, just adjusting to the cost of production, businesses and consumers alike having to tighten their purses as the cost of things gets higher. And then if you look at the next page of your packet, you can see the outlook for growth has declined significantly. Now, for our part, for the district's portfolio, I'm going to move ahead to page 19 of your packet, which shows the portfolio analysis. And like I emphasize each time I speak to you, I think the really important thing is our ability to keep our focus when we're managing the district's assets on the fundamentals of investment analysis. Our primary objectives are safety first, liquidity of the portfolio, and lastly, thinking about income opportunities. And I want to harp on safety for a moment because at times like these, when there's so much uncertainty in terms of policy, what the Fed will do, what the market is doing, we think diversification is paramount. And so if you look at the pie chart in the middle of this page on 19, our goal is to always have it be as colorful as possible. And that is because, we really want to disperse the risk across multiple asset classes. And then the size of the boxes, particularly for the yellow and gold tones, really reflect that within each of those asset classes, we're really trying to disperse across different companies. We have been able to leverage the considerable resources of U.S. Bank in this time. One of my favorite new resources that we have access to is an in-house economist. And they have been really working with our credit teams and with others to really not only evaluate what these individual issuers are doing with regards to their cost of production and others, but really think about the implications of the tariff policy itself on these businesses' ability to manage. And that has been really useful as we sort of dig into what the implications are. Another thing that I will talk about is our allocation to U.S. Treasuries. Ratings have declined, as everyone talks about, our ability to handle debt. U.S. Treasuries still remain, the reserve currency, the risk-free currency for the world. There has not been another asset class to replace it. And so having a healthy allocation to Treasuries means we have access to liquidity in the event we should need to raise funds. Lastly, with regard to liquidity, the maturity distribution of the portfolio is shown on the bottom left of this slide. And we're constantly working and speaking with district staff about cash flow movement. And so really just want to emphasize we're working hand in hand with the district's team to ensure that there's adequate liquidity in the portfolio. And so again, when we're at a place where it's, what did the news say a moment ago? What did the tweet say a second ago? Who changed their mind about this, that, and the third? Leaning on the fundamentals is more important than ever. And the district's portfolio is in really good position. We've been able to increase the earnings over time. And if you take a look at the investments we purchased, I know there's a great summary earlier on in the packet. You'll see, really healthy names, really good yields. We've been able to maintain good income in this portfolio. We expect that to continue for the foreseeable future in spite of all of the noise that's going on in the economy. So I'll pause there. for questions from the group.
Thank you, Monique. Any questions of Monique? Director Hill.
Yes, I'll throw one out. Talking about costs, could we talk about time? Is this slowing down the process of moving things and holding up much more?
In terms of the policy that will be implemented, or
does it take more time to ship if you're importing something? Is that you have delays at the ports?
Yes.
A delay of everything that we get, which is money.
Yeah.
And scheduling.
No, that's it.
Seeing that dimension.
Yeah, that's a great question. There was a lot of focus a couple of weeks ago on the lack of movement in terms of shipping and port activity. I actually don't think that that's flushed itself out in the data yet. I think we actually haven't seen the impacts of that lack of activity. And I think we'll see that in the next month or so, but that is something that was very much being paid attention to. I don't think it's been reported on as much as it probably should have been, but that is something that we're going to see the impacts on sooner rather than later. And I think that's why you're hearing folks like Walmart just trying to preemptively say, hey, you will be seeing higher prices in the very near future. And anecdotally, I was telling your CFO earlier that, I literally went to pick up paint earlier this week, and the paint guy said, thank God you picked this up today, because, in 2 weeks, this price is going up by 60%.
That doesn't include International Orange, does it?
Shellac primer.
Just to that extent, I mean, have you seen, I know that locally we've been talking about sales tax being flat, declining and whatnot. Consumer, there's a lot of anecdote, at least with consumer spending and caution out there. Is there any, and I guess we're waiting on that next quarter to see what's really happening on the sales tax front. Have you heard anything?
Yes. So consumer sentiment is down significantly, and as a result, retail sales and retail activity is down significantly as well. I think like businesses have been, pulling some activity forward. I think consumers, for their part, are starting to slow their spending, just quite frankly reflective of higher prices already and the anticipation of things going up. One of my favorite phrases is prices are always sticky on the downside. Meaning that, some businesses already increased prices in anticipation of tariffs. And, those tariffs have been delayed. And, those prices didn't come down because tariffs weren't implemented. I expect they'll increase further when we actually see, tariffs actually hit the prices on things. And so consumers are feeling that and are pulling back. And that's going to have, rolling effects everywhere.
Yeah. Anything else? Well, again, Monique, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your report. Very much appreciate.
Thank you.
And I'll look and see if there's anyone from the public before we take a motion to.
Yeah, no speakers from the public on this item.
Okay, this is an action item to ratify the commitments and expenditures, ratify the previous investments, authorize the reinvestments, and accept the investment report. I'll look to my colleagues for a motion. Second. So a motion and a second. We'll do voice votes.
Sure.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Please say no. Hearing no opposition, that does pass unanimously with all present. Moving on then to item number 4, which is to authorize a budget adjustment and or transfers. Budget increase in the fiscal year 24-25 Bridge Division capital budget for project 1923 Golden Gate Suspension Bridge seismic retrofit action. This is just coming off the heels of our building and operating committee. And
I don't have anything to add other than that's my head nod, Director Barr.
I'll look to my colleagues if there's any further questions on this particular item.
You have to stop it first.
And is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this particular item?
We have no speakers on this item.
With that, can I get a motion to approve the budget increase as outlined in the staff report under 4A.
So moved.
Second.
So a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Please say no. Hearing no opposition, that does pass unanimously. Moving on to 5. Authorize actions related to the grant programs. Jennifer.
We have no items on that.
We have no items on that one. That's why it says none.
You almost got me there for a minute, don't you?
Moving on then to 6, authorize the execution of an extension of the commercial paper line of credit agreement with JP Morgan Chase Bank.
Good morning, Director Rabbit and members of the Finance Committee. The item before you is to authorize the extension of the line of credit renewal with JP Morgan Chase Bank for the commercial paper program at a 0.43% cost, equating to $333,000 a year for a 2-year term for $666,000 that begins June 30th, 2025 and runs through June 29, 2027. Just as a history, the commercial paper program was created in 2000 to provide funds for the original last seismic retrofit program and renovation of the main cable. And it allows the district to issue notes at a prevailing interest rate not to exceed 270 days. Currently, we have a $61 million line of credit. We continue to have a AA- credit rating with Standard & Poor's, which has allowed us to negotiate competitive rates. So in looking at the renewal, we considered a 1, 2, or 3-year and settled in on a 2-year lock as the rate was competitive, and it allows us for some future flexibility to coincide with the timing of your new seismic retrofit construction project. There is a history of the renewal funding over the years on the bottom page of 44, but as you can see, the rates have been coming down since COVID, so we're pleased to see that. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them on this item.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions on this particular item? Please, Director Bedoni.
Yeah. Jennifer, thank you. How often do we use this line of credit?
Not often. I mean, really, for sometimes if we have a really big project and you need kind of a cash flow shift, that's when we're looking at it. But it really is keep it as a line of credit to make sure that we just have available short term.
Okay, and there's no way we can self-fund this. Reserve.
Yeah, we don't really need, in terms of it being a line of credit, at least it's just sitting there, right? So it's not like a bond where you have to keep paying the interest rates down. So it's really when you use it more so than it being a bond that's issued and then you're obligated to just pay on it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else have any questions? Is there any public comment on this one?
We have no public comment on this item.
If there's no further questions, I'll look to my colleagues if someone's willing to make a motion.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second, and again on a voice vote. All those in favor,
Aye.
please say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Please say no. Hearing no opposition, that does pass unanimously. Thank you. Moving on then to item number 7. The initial presentation of our proposed fiscal year 25-26 operating and capital budget. Jeff.
Hi, good morning. As I said to John, thanks for warming you up because that was just the warm-up act. So this is the annual budget presentation. I am going to refer to the book quite a bit. We're actually going to walk through that. So if you don't have a hard copy or access to electronic copy, we have extra copies in the back, but we'll be flipping through where you can listen to my voice and imagine the graphs as we look at them. So if I just want to make sure everyone had access. All right, well, let's get started. As most of you know, I've been producing this budget for the past 24 years. I'm almost to the silver anniversary. But this will be the first time I'm doing it as the auditor controller. I actually, last night was thinking, I really wanted to shake it up this year. I was going to do a PowerPoint. I was going to show you all these flashy pictures. And I realize now why Joe and I created this presentation the way it is, because we really need to kind of walk through the book and show you kind of the details of what we've done in the budget process. So I'm going to do it as we have traditionally done. You have a board item in front of you. That's item number 7. It's 45 in your packet. We don't take action usually the first time. Today's we do the presentation through the budget. Next month we will have come back again for possible action, but we can also do questions and answers at that meeting as well if you have them as follow-up. So feel free to reach out to me if you think of some between now and then. Happy to answer those. But the annual budget really has a set of recommendations as part of the process. So I first just need to, walk through the board item on the recommendation so you know what the budget process is asking you to do this year. And then we'll turn over to the book and get into it if that's okay with you. All right. So for the recommendations, it really is a follow through on page 45. So this book, authorizes everything contained in this budget, the goals, the accomplishments, the reserve structure. We do have some proposed changes to positions this year, and we have a proposed update 10-year capital plan. So as part of that budget process, we'll be asking you to approve that when we ask for the budget approval. We also put in there the assumptions we have for salaries. And so currently we have a salary increase for the coalition, non-reps, the painters, ATU administrative employees. It does not include an ATU bus operator salary increase as they're currently still under negotiation. That'll be considered at a later date, so it is not included in the book. It also includes a capital contribution of $21 million. It authorizes this particular budget. We have 8 capital projects. We're requesting for a total of $7.8 million to increase the actual projects, and we'll go through that. And lastly, as part of the budget process, we actually ask you to approve things that may not currently be in the proposed budget that can be included in the adopted budget, so we don't have to come back for actions such as things that will be approved through June 30th. So if the board approves different actions that affect the budget through June 30th, we'll approve those in the adopted budget. We'll carry over any incomplete capital projects when we close the year for fiscal year 24-25. We'll move any of the capital projects, and we'll talk about this, that we have a list that aren't currently in the budget, but they're on a list to come into the 25-26 budget if resources and time allow. And finally, it'll allow budget transfers to comply. Usually at the end of the year, we have a little bit of shuffle to make sure we're complying for the budget for the adopted book. So with that, if you don't have any questions on the recommendation, I would like to get started review on the book. All right.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Jennifer. The point 2 on your recommendations, just for the record, your second sentence there are no salary increases reflected for ATU bus operators as they are under negotiation. I completely understand that, but I'm wondering if you can make clear for us what the mechanism is for paying any increased salaries that are negotiated ultimately, since they are not budgeted in the budget.
Correct. So as part of the action, when a negotiation is finished, right, and they settle, it'll come before you for that, whatever it may be, a cost of living increase or whatever the terms are. And at that point, the recommendation would be to do a budget adjustment or increase to the actual budget of which it's in. So if it falls within fiscal year 25-26, then the request will be to amend the budget to allow for those increases or changes.
So strictly a procedural remedy.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. So if you would turn to the first page after the cover, and by the way, thanks to the marketing department we again always try to find some interesting pictures for the cover. So I hope you enjoy those. I'd like to start with I'd like to acknowledge that it really does take a village to get this budget and produce it. In particular, I'd like to thank the budget office, and they're here, right here behind me. Make sure they're here. Grant Martinez, who is a consultant, has filled in, heading up the process of the year. And your budget.
Make them raise their hands. So
well,
which one is which.
Right. Everyone stand up, but
since we don't see them.
So okay. It's Grant Martinez, and then we have Eric Reeves, our principal budget analyst, and Lauren DePaschalis, who is also our budget analyst. And those two have met with every department director, executive team member to ensure that all the significant pieces are completed, both in the operating and capital budget. In addition, we want to thank Chris Rogers here, our finance analyst, who's really our glue. She keeps us on task. She makes sure that we're resolving anything outstanding. She is the reason this book actually gets produced and put together. So a big thank you to the budget office this year. They did a great job, and it takes a village to do it. Thank you all. Lastly, none of this would be done without the help of the executive team and all their staff. So again, thank you for everyone's time and effort on this. So with that, let's start our annual review. On page 2, so if you turn to the next page, you'll see that we want to acknowledge the district's receipt of the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from GFOA. This is the district's 19th year to receive this award. We're hoping to even it out for 20 years on this particular budget when this is submitted. But this is really significant in that the district is recognized in having a budget that really meets the standard criteria for all public agencies. So we're pretty proud of that. All right, next up, the table of contents. So you turn to the next page, you have a set of table of contents. For those of you at home that want to peruse the electronic version, I just wanted to note that we actually spend a lot of time that if you are on the electronic version, you see something you want to actually look at, you click on that page number, it'll go on the electronic version. On the bottom, there's a return. It'll come back to the table of contents. It actually takes a big effort, but it really makes it easy to maneuver through the budget book. So we wanted to know if you have that, you can go back and forth on the particular pages. Okay, turning to page 9. That is the beginning of the general manager's message. So really, we consider the general manager's message as kind of the welcome and state of the district. It summarizes significant issues and accomplishments throughout the district through the year. This message acknowledges that the district is really the one-stop shop for transportation into the city from the North Bay. So whether you cross our bridge, ride our buses or ferries, if you're coming into San Francisco, you are likely to touch us. You have to get through the bridge. It acknowledges that the district is primarily funded with tolls and fares as a user-based agency, and that the district doesn't receive any dedicated state or local tax revenues. The general manager message also recognizes that the traffic is still down 25 to 30% below pre-pandemic levels, which transit services are heavily dependent upon and is subsidized in funding. If you haven't done so already, the general manager's message is a good place to get a quick summary of where the district sits today on funding and some priority projects. Some of the priority projects noted in here include the work that's being ongoing with the North Bay transit operators to align service in an effort called Mascots, working on the ferry vessel replacement called the MV Liwa, and of course the $400 million bridge investment program grant is one of our highest priorities to ensure that we meet that deadline in September 30th for obligating this grant and ensuring this funding isn't lost. As always, we acknowledge that we cannot do anything we are doing without our partner agencies, the bridge users, bus and ferry riders, and of course our employees. All right, we are going into the financial overview next. So this book is organized by sections. They're color-coded on the top. And starting on page 19, we're going to walk through the financial overview. I'm going to go through the first 2 sections. I'm not going to go into too much detail on each of the division sections, so bridge, bus, ferry, and district. But I would suggest, if you have time, please take a look at each of the divisions as they have an outlined profile, a status that's written by your DGMs and officers, and a kind of an overall of what's happening in each division. But just as a roadmap, I'm only going through the first 2 sections. Okay, on page 19, it talks about the overall financial situation. It summarizes the overall district revenue and expenses. For fiscal year 25-26, we're proposing a $363.6 million budget. This is made up of $293.7 million in operating expenses and $69.9 million in capital expenses. The proposed operating budget will be funded through $277 million in operating revenues and $26.4 million in district reserves. In this proposed budget, we laid out an unusual circumstance because we knew we would not be getting enough funds in this current year that we're in, fiscal year 24-25, with the SB 125 assistance to cover our shortfall. And we did know we would be getting more funds in 25-26. So our plan was the shortfall we had this year, we were going to pay from our district reserves and then pay ourselves back when we receive the SB 125 funds in the following year in 25-26. So when you see this negative amount, that's just transferring it back to the reserves so that we kind of keep our reserves back intact as originally planned. The capital budget of $69.9 million will be funded through $34.5 million in government grants and $35.4 in the district reserves. But those district reserves have been earmarked for these capital projects specifically. So that has always been the plan on how we fund our capital projects. All right, we'll go into a little bit more depth on different funding sources by category, but I want to look at page 20, and there's a capital budget review and a 10-year capital plan. I just want to note that we've spent some significant time revamping the 10-year capital plan this year. It's one of the directives from the strategic initiatives that the board approved last May. So given that extensive overhaul, we are planning to present that 10-year capital plan in more detail next month, so we won't do that this month, but wanted to note that it is the proposed plan is in your appendices here in Appendix E and included in its updated form. On page 21, there's a well-done graphic that shows the district sources of revenue and where it goes to spend bridge versus transit. As you can see, transit expenses combined, both operating and capital, continue to be over half of what's being spent, while tolls from the bridge are almost half of the revenue that's collected. Page 22. This table is a 3-year comparison of the district's budget, both operating and capital, and it includes the fiscal year 23-24 actuals, and this year's estimated actuals for 24-25, and then the proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26. Traditionally, half of our bridge tolls go to support our transit service. Since the pandemic, bridge traffic has not returned to pre-COVID, therefore toll revenue that would generally go to subsidized transit is less available. We're grateful to receive the one-time funding to bridge the gap for transit in our one-time funds that we've had, but we fully expect to expend the last of the one-time funds in fiscal year 25-26. However, as you all know, we continue to seek one-time additional funding. But what's important about this table is that it shows at the end of the year we're going to need $60 million from reserves for both operating and capital needs. On the capital side, it's anticipated because we plan that for that $35.4 million in district funds for this almost $70 million capital budget. We saved for years for expending these. And of course, as I say, thanks to John, we will be spending them quickly. So we've gone actually from a $44 million capital expense budget in 23-24 to now $142 million that we expect to spend for this year. And then for next year, because we finished most of the suicide deterrent project and with the ramp up seismic, you're looking at a almost $70 million capital budget.
We have a question, Director Park.
I have a naive question, Jennifer. Should we be nervous that we're spending down the reserves and in this era where our grant funding might be decreased? Bridge traffic doesn't seem to be up, and we just sort of nonchalantly talk about spending most of our reserves, and there are all kinds of little negative numbers here when it talks about reserve. So, and I guess that's what caused me to ask the question with the last one too, and that is that really good finance to look ahead at how long it's taken us? I remember I sat on the board when we didn't really have a robust reserve, and it was a big deal for us to try to put money away every month. I mean, it's been 15 years that we've been doing that, and how nervous should we be as board members to hear you say that we're spending down our reserves and, oh, by the way, we'll build them up again next year?
Well, there's a bunch of bullets we're going to start talking about on the reserve replenishment, but it's a very good question in that, as you know, when I came to the district, there were hardly any reserves.
Exactly.
And one of the basic principles that I said that I brought from where I came from was that if you're going to do a capital project, you should fund it. We shouldn't be leasing the capital project. If you're going to do it, you're going to buy it. So as soon as you start that capital project, we encumber the whole funding for it because we want to make sure we can finish it. Because when I got here, I said, what are you going to do? Just pay by the year and you don't have the money the next year? You're just going to leave half of the construction going. So, we prudently, as you know, put it away. And when we plan for the capital budget, we've over the years said, all right, how much do we think we're going to have in grants? How much are we going to have that we need for district reserves for this capital plan? And so we have been saving for this. Granted, the seismic retrofit project that we've been discussing, it's kind of throw us for a little bit of a loop, but I think the understanding for our funding, right, is for that $870 million. You've got that $400 million. So that's why the $400 million for the bridge infrastructure is the key for us to make sure that that capital project is successful. We also have the funding from the state. So with that, the district's portion of that reserve, for this first phase is well intact. You've got over $400 million in your district reserves now. We had saved for all these for a big project like this. You know, if you recall what, mid-2000s when we did Doyle Drive, we made sure we saved for that payment. We actually did that through the capital reserves to ensure that we had, sufficient. So all that to say, while, the capital side has been planned for those reserves, and those reserves we've been watching and making sure that we're maneuvering. We knew that the seismic retrofit would be the one that we were, rolling the dice to see what was going to come out. I think, because of some of the new regulations that we've been having and the way the seismic retrofit program was, reevaluated for price costs, that wasn't what we anticipated. So that's more so not having the money in the bank, but we already knew what it was supposed to cost. And obviously people have questions about the cost of goods going up.
And I guess I get that at some level. Are we going to be able to rebuild that reserve? It's not the same as it used to be.
Yep. So the other half of it, is definitely not going to be the same. We are definitely going to be spending these out because this is the biggest project we've done, I think, ever, right? I don't even think the first one was
old.
Yes.
This is not the end of our project.
Correct.
As an older bridge person.
However, on the other side,
we get more fragile.
Correct. And as we've talked about on the reserves for the operating budget, we really need to be prudent on, living within our means. So we always talk about how the bridge traffic is reduced. We say that because we know that the subsidy towards transit is less than it used to be. We used to be able to take half of our bridge tolls and pay for transit, on customer demand. And as we know, coming out of the pandemic, it's just a different world, especially on the transit side. So as we've always said, we have been watching our operating revenue stream, and I'll talk about it. We're pretty steady. So we kind of know where we think we're going to be. Dennis is always optimistic that we will have a little bit more bump in bridge traffic, and that will help us on the operating revenue side. But know that when we put together the operating budget, we specifically make sure that there's set aside for capital. That's why we always talk about the $21 million for capital contribution and the depreciation. That helps fund those reserves back up. Now, if we have to keep spending $25 million on the operating side for an operating deficit, that is where I think we will have to be coming back to the board to say, hey, we're not seeing an excess of revenues coming in, or we're not getting any more one-time funding, for transit. It's that expense side that we'll have to start tackling to make sure that operating budget stays intact. So one of the things here, as you keep looking down below, so we can talk a little bit about that, you see that $60 million hole. If you go down to the bottom and it's the net impact on district reserves table, if you look in 23-24, we were able to add $67.7 million to the reserves last year, right? And of course, I get alarmed because we look at the estimated actual this year and it says, well, actually net, even though I put money in the capital, even though, we put our depreciation in, we're net taking out of the reserves. And that is a little bit of a shell game in the sense that we know that we're getting more money from SB 125 to fill the deficit, but that's about $10 million, in actuals. So when we look at the proposed 25-26, again, we see a dip in the reserves, but this is also a proposed budget. So I always say our proposed budget has assumptions of making sure that all budgeted positions are funded, that it assumes a little bit of growth in service. As we've done, and you've seen, we have kind of a budget that's robust, but we know we want to live within our means. So we try to manage the expense side pretty tight as we go through, and you'll see that as a result. I think we were, $30 million as a budget for this year, but we're only going to be 9.7 below is a shortfall compared to where we thought we would be budget, and that's because we're not spending the money. We really make sure that we're not adding the extra transit service if the demand's not there, or some of the vacancies.
Okay, thank you.
Before I go to Director Massey, if I may just follow up on that.
Sure.
Am I wrong when I'm looking at and I'm less concerned, to be honest, less concerned about the reserves for the capital, because that is, to me, a little more straightforward. You put money in, you do the project, or not if you don't have the money. But on the O&M side, looking at and knowing that what we've gone through since 2020 and the quote unquote aspirational budgets versus more actual, and how optimistic do we want to be? And yeah, we're within budget, but it's because we're, maintaining vacancies and or not spending levels, which is great. But the budget doesn't necessarily reflect the reality. It's a little more aspirational. And I knew that was important in order to obtain the federal funds.
Exactly.
I get that. But now, am I looking at a 16 million, 16.7, the difference between 293.7 and 277 on the O&M side?
Okay, when you're looking at the operating revenue, the 277 to the 293, correct?
Yeah. So that's in the black or in the red, 16.7 million.
Yeah, but if you look at the estimated actual next to it on that 29.37, right, you see this year we spent 260. So you can kind of get a sense of how much we usually spend actuals compared to the budgeted. So even if you increase that, the 260 to the 277 per se.
It's still going to be balanced through fund balance.
It'll be balanced because, so on paper, the proposed budget wants to make sure that you have the ability to have a little growth for transit if the demand comes back, right? And Dennis would say if he's here, I am very conservative when it comes to looking at the revenues because I want to make sure that we're not over proposing and projecting. So, the toll revenues are good, but in fact, this was done February, and, we talk about the monthly, we had a really good March and April. So traffic is going up. All the modes have been going up. So this is, for revenue, I will say is pretty conservative. We also make sure, and the expenses have all the vacancies in there. So we keep them in there, as part of the budget because they are budgeted positions. So we are managing kind of the day to day, but as a requested proposed budget, we want to make sure that there's room in there for service changes if needed.
And just I should know this, but as a district, do we have a policy of sweeping vacancies after so many fiscal years?
No.
I know in the county we did that after 2008. If a vacancy was there for no other reason,
right?
Other than, if you can't fill it or you're recruiting, but you can't get it filled, but if you're just holding it, it became a departmental reserve issue that wasn't necessarily helping balance the overall budget.
No, we don't do that. I think because, we have kind of three modes, right? And I think that doing kind of a sweep on that, there's often a reason why the vacancies exist. Some of them are just hard to fill. Some of them rotate a lot. So at any given time you'll have vacancies. So it really is up to the general manager to kind of review the business need. And that's what we've been doing, especially in COVID. We've been just trying to ramp up. We've got, a good chunk of retirements that have happened. We've got new people who've come in. We've just got we're talking about things like AI or cybersecurity, just new programs that are coming in. So we really use the vacancies as a way to, one, what's the business need to fill them? And two, we really have been, since the pandemic, just kind of like, what do we really need? And making sure, again, that expense side is ratcheted back to meet the needs on the revenue side.
Thank you. And thank you for your patience, Director Masson.
Sure.
Please go ahead.
No problem. My question has evolved over the last 5 minutes.
Oh, no.
Not the same as it was I was originally thinking. So monies in reserve that are not earmarked for a project, which would mostly be on the capital side or all on the capital side. The rest of the reserve, is it sort of divided up between departments, or is it just a free-for-all for whoever needs it?
I wouldn't say it's extremely flexible. I mean, I think this district is different than many in that we don't have separated funds by business, which a lot of you guys are all aware, right? We don't have a general fund, we don't have a capital fund, we don't have a street and lighting fund. It is one big fund. So in that sense, it's flexible, and it's done by design because we want to be able to have the flexibility where the need is. And I think the board has been very specific on the policies on making sure that we are spending appropriately those reserves or keeping it, what are they dedicated for? So most of them are dedicated for capital. We do have, the emergency reserve fund that we put in at one point. You have a self-insured reserve for the bridge that the history on that was after 9/11, it would cost so much money to actually insure the bridge. We're like, we'll just put the money into the reserve because at some point, even if you got the insurance, you wouldn't probably get what you put into it. So there are some specifics, but we don't often, and I can't even think maybe once that we've had to use the district reserves to cover operating expenses, right? And so I think the crux of that is what we're doing. I think this is the year, as we've talked about for many years, this is the runway year. So, and the runway year really is, all right, how are we going to right size ourselves, both mainly on the expense side, because we now know kind of what the revenues look like. Do we need to do some of those things? And I think as that comes through, however, every year as your finance person, I say that, your general manager seems to be able to find additional funding to get us through another year. So remember those one-time funds were there, and some of that still, technically is in the district reserves for that long runway. So that is what we were intending to do for COVID. Unlike other folks, they got it in, they spent it, they got it in, they spent it. We spent some of it, we tucked it away, said we're only going to do as much as the customer demands. So I'm, not alarmed this year to take the district reserves out of the operating expenses because we kind of knew that was going to happen, that we needed to have this runway. I think we're waiting for a couple more things to see. Are we going to have an additional one-time funding? And if it really comes to fruition and we have significant changes in the revenue stream, we are definitely going to be coming back and saying, all right, we need to make some hard choices on the expense side.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have anything before we go back to Jennifer? Please go ahead.
All right. Now I'm completely torn off of my monologue here because I answered half of this. So I apologize if some of this might be a repeat, but I kind of want to make sure that these points are kind of salient through here. So what I was going to say before Director Parr actually preempted and had actually the answers hopefully to some of these questions. So I'm glad you asked that because that means I was anticipating kind of your concerns.
There was only one, and that was, do we have enough money?
Exactly. Do we have enough money?
It was pretty simple.
Absolutely. All right. And so really what I want to say is, right, this proposed $277 million in operating expenses is a proposed budget. It does allow for funding more transit service as customer demands. So, we haven't actually used some of that, as well as the cost of living increases, and all the budgeted positions are funded. The proposed budget needs 26.4 to make up that shortfall. And again, this past fiscal year, we spent less because we're careful to manage the increase of transit service to customer demand. And we expect, again, to have an actual lower deficit than the proposed budget anticipates if there's not a significant growth. So maybe I said that the first time, maybe I'm going to question. All right. Reserve replenishment. So as we talked about at the bottom of page 22, we talk about the health of reserves. Traditionally, we've been able to add net to the reserves, as you're seeing for 24-25 and 25-26. We're going to have less contributed. But that also means if you look at the net, we are still contributing to the capital contribution and depreciation, regardless of that shortfall. I do want to recognize, the board has been really diligent in increasing revenues with the 5-year toll and fare plans that we've had over the years. And that allows us really to focus on a strong reserve position. So those decisions allow us to make the choices on these large capital projects that include the new vessel replacement and seismic. And I think that's really the message. That was what these reserves are designed to do. And again, that being said, I want to point out using district reserves to pay for operating shortfalls is not sustainable and not a long-term solution. So as we've just said, we're actively pursuing more one-time funds for operating expenses. So I actually have in my notes, it's not alarming to spend the reserves this year, but we will be looking for ways to ensure a long-term balanced budget. That is just going to be a necessary goal this year. So the best way to talk about how we spend those reserves, let's look at page 24 and 25. So as I said, you have over 400 million. So on the left side, you'll see 400 million that you've built up over the years. And I mean to send Joe an email at some point to be like, all right, here's your 400 million. I guess his exit so that before it dips. Proceed him. However, if you look on the right side on the projected reserve for capital funds, we put that together because as we just talked about, our policy is we don't want to pay for a capital project that we don't have funding for. So it does look different than we've had in the years in that if we, I call it encumbering or commit all the district funds to the current capital projects proposed for fiscal year 25-26, and that's that red line. Yes, next year you looks scary. You are below the line. You have committed more than you have in the reserves.
I appreciate that acknowledgement. I thought I made that.
No, you were not crazy. However, what we want to make sure you understand is on the cash flow side, if you look at the blue line is what we believe the cash flow, how they're actually going to spend out those capital projects. So, it's really unusual. In years past, it would be like, oh, they would kind of be parallel and stay along the line. Well, with an $870 million project and, 20% of that has to be district funded at least, it's going to drop. And I think that's really what you're seeing. The cash flow, however, doesn't run out till 2029, but it also doesn't take into account replenishing that capital contribution that we talk about every year. So, it's not going to look as, high as we've built it over the years, but we are cognizant that it is a priority to make sure those capital reserves get replenished because we are a capital intensive district and we need to make sure that those responsibly are funded. All right. You turn to the next section on page 27. I won't go through all of them, but this section will give you a good idea on the trends for bridge traffic, bus and ferry ridership, and all the respective revenues. So for an example, on page 27, what we've done is the green line is what we call pre-COVID. So that's 2019. That's where bridge traffic was. And then by month. And then the red line is our infamous 2020. And then there were all a bunch of lines because we're now in 2025. So we took some of them out and we put the yellow line, which is last year's trend, and that to show that this blue line is following closely behind it. So it's become really predictable, whereas years past you would kind of see it bounce around. So we feel like we're kind of in this, new normal, and we can predict and project based on those trends. So you can go through those if you're interested. They have revenues attached to them as well. So let's turn to page 33, and we're going to talk about transit funding. So this is a fairly new graph, and it's our second year we've done it. The graph on page 33 demonstrates kind of the loss of toll revenue that we would generally use to fund transit. And as a result of the pandemic, as you can see, the red dotted line is what the actual revenues are, and the dotted line is what I call the lost revenue opportunity. It is what we think the revenue would be if the pandemic had not happened. As you can see, they're closer this year than they have been because the dotted line, what it doesn't take into account, it didn't take account to our per toll increase over the years. So obviously on 2025 dollars, that dotted line would have been higher, so that gap would have still continued. But I think it's an important graphic to show that, over the last 5 years, kind of the lost opportunity that we have for revenue that usually we can predict pretty well. So we've had to adjust to that. Right. Question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So on that graph, the 84 million, do you know what that number would be today in
Yeah, I actually asked them to calculate it, so I'm happy to get that done. Because I realize that these are $2020 with 2020 traffic.
Yeah.
Projected out for 2025. I'm happy to do that and see what that
Just
comparison is.
Thank you.
Commercial paper, page 37, talks about the, on page 35 on the transit system funding, that is just a note that you can see the different types of revenue streams and what it takes to fund transit. As of note, the toll subsidy, is usually 50%, but, in the next coming years, we're only going to be able to fund, take 34% of 34% of what it costs transit will be funded through tolls. And that is a result, obviously, of not having enough toll revenue for the actual budget as we're talking about the transit budget, not necessarily the transit expenses. So again, the budget has room for service growth. You also see the district reserve payback or the district reserves needed for bus versus ferry. So 17.1 for bus, 9.3 for ferry that's predicted for 25-26. All right. Page 37 talks about the commercial paper program. We just had that item on renewal, so I won't go through that in detail, but if you want some information in history, it's here on page 37. And that leads us to the strategic plan on page 38 and 39. This section has a discussion in history of the strategic plan. The board adopted a new strategic plan last May, so that item is actually included in this book in Appendix F if you ever need to refer to that. We will do an annual review for that in the fall, but this section also highlights some of the initiatives staff intend on reviewing this year, so you can review that as well. So with that concludes the main light of this section. We still got one to go. And I'm happy to pause to see if there are any questions on the front section.
Anyone? I don't see any hands raised. Why don't you keep going?
All right. So we'll go to the next section, which is our gold section, operating and capital budget summary. So starting on page 48, we'll go into a little bit more depth on the operating and capital budget itself. So again, we've been talking about, the operating budget is 293.7. Again, it reflects the current service levels with some room for growth. It represents the COLAs for coalition, non-rep painters, and A2 administrative employees. The percent is 3.75% for 25-26. On the bottom page of 48, you can see how the 293.7 million will be funded, of which 57% is tolls, 17 is operating grants. The reserves will fund approximately 26.4 million. The bridge division expenses make up 41% of the budget, followed by bus at 38 and ferry at 21. On page 49, we have over the years tried to graphically demonstrate on the bar charts below how the funding streams are broken up. And the important kind of takeaway is we are labor intensive. You can see the different grant fundings by chunk. And this section also notes kind of that 9.7 million that we're paying ourselves back. So when you see that negative, it's just paying ourselves back for what we think we're going to end up for this year. All right, on page 50 and 51, there's more in-depth look if you want to read through revenues and each of the categories. The investment income prediction and the state operating income in details. Again, SB 125 is under what we call one-time funding. So you'll see the 35.2 million that we are assuming and to get for 25-26. All right, I'm going to skip over those pages of revenue 52 and 53, and we're on page 54, which is the operating expenses. If this is your first time going through the budget with us, we are a very labor intensive, so 70% of our budget are salaries and benefits. As we touch kind of the difference between what's happened in 24-25, how we think we're going to end of the year, and 25-26. Again, I think a big chunk of it is the room for growth and ensuring all the positions are budgeted. you can see, as we go to page 56, those are more in depth on each of the details of the changes that we do, kind of what the reasons are. And then we come to kind of the more data side. On pages 57 through 62, there really are just data points you can read on your own time. But if you have questions on what the total transaction average costs are, we do a section on OPEB, healthcare premiums, workers' comp, indirect cost allocation plan, and then how the capital contribution expenses are spread by division. And also there is a table on there on pension contribution rates by bargaining units to finish up that section on page 62. Okay. Almost getting there. The last operating section I wanted to point out is the budget position changes, and that starts on page 63. So for the most part, the position changes that are proposed in this budget enable us to refine and meet the current business needs of mostly vacant positions. In here, there are 3 proposed changes for filled positions that are really, again, to meet the current business needs and create efficiencies for the district. I'm happy to go through these in detail, but they are in your board item and they are here in the book as well. And I can pause here because I'm going to close out the operating budget discussion and then have a quick discussion on the capital budget.
Anyone?
Questions?
On to capital.
All right, on to capital. So as we discussed, we have a proposed 10-year capital plan included in it's Appendix F. And we've really ensured to update all the projects and costs, so you'll get an in-depth look at that next month. This section here is just really for the current fiscal year, or not current, for the proposed fiscal year 25-26 capital budget. As you can see on page 66, really a quick view that we've been talking about again. This almost $70 million capital budget is funded by almost half in district funds, 35.4, and then conversely 34.5 in grants. There are currently 77 projects. 13 are going to be new for fiscal year 25-26. 60 are continuing, and then we have 4 capital equipment projects. We expect in the end of this year, fiscal year 24-25, that we'll be closing 15 projects, which is a pretty good number for us. And then the breakout of these projects are 65% are bridge, 9% are bus, 20% are ferry, and 6% are district.
I think we're staggering that we have that many capital projects underway right now. 77?
Yeah. A lot of them are, we have some small technology projects, so those will kind of, each have their own distinct.
The staggering part is we see some here at the board, but we don't see 77. So to see that number, it's a little overwhelming. But then you have money.
Yeah. Well, so on pages 71 to 74, that is, the projects. So you can take a look at them. If you have questions on them, happy to go. But they are, some are small dollar amounts. Of course, the big one is $25 million earmarked for the seismic retrofit construction. But as you can see through there, starting on page 71, that many of them are $1 million and under. So as part of this capital budget, we're also asking for 8 current budgets to have increases. That total increase equals $7.9 million, with the bulk of the ask actually for this one is for the ferry vessel rehabilitation project. The cost estimate for this was done in 2022, and since then, obviously with COVID, and someone had asked before, just the shipbuilding work and the cost of the marine environment has gone up tremendously, and it was $2022, so that one was reassessed, and that one's underway. So that one's asking for a request, particularly in the budget. All right. Lastly, on page 75, we talk about this capital budget project list. So what we do is through the budget, we request to authorize the ability to move projects that aren't, quote, in the budget to come into the current year budget if resources and needs allow. We do that so that you don't have a really bloated capital budget for 1 year, and that would really kind of throw off some of the dynamics because we don't know at the time. We go through the budget process. We focus on ongoing projects because we want to get those done. And then we create this budget basically through discussions on the divisions, the auditor controller, myself, the district engineer, and the general manager. So we just make sure we have enough resources and money and availability for that work plan to be created. But we have asked to have this list so that just in case and as priorities change, we're able to take things from the list and put that into the budget.
Yeah, and I ask you,
Absolutely.
just on that, and I should know this, do we have district-wide a formal asset management plan, or is it by division? And if it's by division, how do we coordinate that? And I take it that's what you just explained, but is there a more formal process to that to make sure that we're keeping up? I love sinking funds. I love saving for that piece of equipment that's going to eventually give out and not be surprised by it. But how do we
So
expand upon that?
we have a transit asset management plan, right? So that is one of the guidebooks to making sure that life cycle is being complete. The bridge itself, has a full kind of life cycle plan, as I'll call it. If you, many of you guys know, if you go down into the bridge conference room, still down there, right, Dave? They have, picture of the bridge, and that's the one I always like. It's like red, yellow, green. So you kind of know the status of what's happening and rehabilitation on different parts of the bridge for different types. And we are in the process of starting to put the bridge more kind of formally into an asset program so that we can sync up those a little bit easier. But, there's the maintenance side and the capital side of the bridge. And so they spend a lot of time making sure the bridge portion obviously has its prioritization and funding. The transit asset management, that is actually one of my goals to kind of get that underway and utilize that more as a life cycle review, and that'll dovetail in obviously to the capital plan. And you'll see a little bit of that in the 10-year updated capital plan next month as well.
Yeah, because I know that we were adjusting it slightly given the financial circumstances. I just wanted to make sure that those critical line items weren't going to be left off. I know they're not, but
for sure,
always cautious about that.
All right. But that really ends like the first two sections of the book. As we said, next steps, you'll have an opportunity to have any questions answered. If you want me to do another presentation on parts of the book, happy to do that. But this item will come back to you next month for approval. And today we were just intending to walk through. Thank you for the questions. I think they were really good and hopefully helpful. So with that, thank you for sitting through this long presentation. I'm happy to open it up for more questions if you have any.
Any final questions, comments for Jennifer before?
Thank you to the team.
Yeah, thank you to the team, Director Maston, and then Director Hill.
Yes, very much. Thank you. Each project. On our budget or on our packet, on page 50, what is meant by add one thing full-time position?
So look, when we look at you're looking at the board item.
Sounds cheap.
Okay.
Gets along with everyone.
Yeah.
Are you looking at the board item, or they're both the same, but
Item 7, page 50 in our packet today.
50. Thanks. All right. Yes. So it's what we just kind of reviewed. It's a copy and paste. So these are the proposed changes that we're requesting for the budget. And the board manages position, so it'll always say position. I know a lot of you are used to FTEs or full-time equivalents. And we always like to know whether they're vacant or filled so that you know whether or not it's really kind of changing the position or you are dealing with someone who is already in a position.
But having one,
So really what we do here, and as an example, right, for the bridge division here, we're requesting to convert a position, quite frankly. So we're asking to eliminate the analyst position and add a manager. So it's a net zero. But due to how we want to staff that particular program, we're requesting changes to positions that are vacant.
Okay.
Sort of a classification.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, no, sorry, Director Hill, please.
Yeah, just this is the final I look at the open port that's empty, some very empty. Looking at inflation and all these other arrangements. Obviously, that's not been put into this package. How will we track that or be able to make any estimates so we can see it before it happens? So, sort of like the pandemic, have you thought about that?
I mean, I think we think about it all the time. I get a lot of questions from procurement to be, actually over the last month, I've got a lot of questions from procurement to say, I need to buy this now because they are telling me that tariffs are going to come up. So if we know something is going to increase because a vendor has already told us that, we've been trying to manage the funds. If we're going to buy it anyway, let's hurry up and do this. So we are trying to look at some of those. Services have changed, especially in ferry. Mike and I have talked a lot that it's just skyrocketed. So how do we adjust? And as we're going through a capital intensive phase, as he says, for vessels and landside, how do we get ahead of that? So we are trying to predict on budget, but as you know, every day is a different day, but we are trying to be, that's why we're trying to be cautious too as we go through this. I don't think we are doing anything. We've kind of stopped the nice to haves and we're doing the must haves. And we want to make sure that is done, in priority. So the seismic retrofit, as far as we're concerned, is the highest priority in the district. We have all hands on deck on that because if there's an inflationary factor there, that one is millions of dollars versus, the paint can. Although hopefully the paint for the international orange is steady as well.
Well, yes, and so this is so much in flux. Weeks and months. I would like to see some things that have happened last month or something like that affects the way that the forecasting and accuracy and stuff like that. I would like to ask for that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put our heads together and think of a way to track since we may not be able to see it coming.
It doesn't have to be 56 pages long, but it could say, or shit, I can deliver something like that because it could affect the bridge seismic. Is a big part of it. I would worry about it. But I'd like to see where we're sort of fitting with him with that. That makes sense.
Well, great. I appreciate that very much. To that, and I know we're going to talk about the capital. Kelly and I were just talking previously, and I know Dennis is going to be finding this out firsthand in D.C. about language, grant assurance languages, and everything else. We just had this at the county. I'm sure the other jurisdictions that receive federal funds right now are, trying to grapple with it as well. And our budget's going to have to be nimble. More so this year than any other year. That's been true from the pandemic, but now it's had to be nimble for a new reason.
Correct.
To really adjust. And I think more so on the capital side, that's going to be so dependent upon grant monies that we'll have to figure out what happens if we can't pull those down because of the language within our county. We've been hit by about $100 million to date, and it's just starting. And so,
we have. Our grant analysts have been working really hard to just make sure that they have their feelers out there and any, small or big grants, if there are some changes or direction that's happening. Internally we're making sure that we have everything in order to make sure that those grants can be moving or that we are in compliance with any changes that may have come down for anything to obligate. So that is definitely a priority internally.
Yeah. And it seems like the federal agencies are not consistent. Hopefully the DOT, because it's infrastructure that should be more bipartisan, one would think, would maybe not have the same language that others might have. But
it's a Sonoma cloud.
It is a Sonoma cloud. But we're going to pass a budget in June, and we're planning on having to deal with the budget in the fall again. And so, I'm not sure if that's how we're going to have to deal with it. I think ours is a little more valuable in that regard. But I do appreciate that. I think there's going to be a book signing out in the lobby. But very much appreciate all the work because I know how many hundreds, thousands of hours go into preparing this document. It's so important.
And it's living, breathing, like you said. So we definitely understand that this year could throw us a couple loopholes. So I think that is really what we're trying to do is make sure we're prepared. We know, if this happens, what is the aftermath of that? So we can.
Yeah, and it's difficult times too because you don't want to. You can't just go on speculation because you'll be spinning your own wheels and doing nothing but that. But it's hard not to. At the same time, you have to be kind of prepared for what drops next, and it seemingly happens so quickly. So wonderful times, apparently. So thank you again. Is there any public comment on this particular item?
We do not have public comment, but we would like to poll the public line to make sure that no one's joined on or does want to comment on this item. So I'm going to pass it to Justine. Justine, can you poll your public comment line just in case somebody wants to speak on this item?
Good morning, certainly. If you've joined us this morning and you'd like to speak on this item, please press ** to unmute yourself and let me know. Again, if you'd like to speak on this budget presentation item, please press ** to unmute yourself and let me know, or if you have any public comment. Okay, I'm not hearing anyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Justine.
All right, great. Moving on then to item number 8, which is the status report on the budget.
Current budget.
Is there any? Yeah, the current budget.
Great segment.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good to see, look at page 54. Just what we were talking about, I always say it looks like the budget folks don't know what they're doing, but we build a budget for assumptions for certain things. We say we're going to be 36 million in the hole, and you really are looking at right now 7.6 million. So we do that as this is our tracking device to see how well, we go against ourselves.
You say page 54.
55. 55. Well, that might be fake in itself as well. So. I was doing so well. Yes. Page 55. Maybe my thoughts are on 54, but 55. We said we were going to be 36 million in the hole, and we're really coming in at 7.6 million, and we've been pretty steady so far. I always kind of have done this below the line market valuation just because we don't know that's going to end, but that's also been pretty steady. So if we didn't have that, we'd be closer to 17. But 7.6, we're estimating about 9.7 because that guy and that guy always seem to spend money at the end of the quarter. But I think we're looking better than what the budget definitely predicted.
And again, very much appreciated. I've been around long enough to know I don't like brackets in budgets. That's just me.
Exactly.
Any questions on the status of the current budget? Seeing none, and
No speakers.
No speakers. Thank you for that. How about the monthly review of the Golden Gate traffic tolls, bus ferry, transit patronage fares, all the above?
Okay, all I have to say, April was a good year. So looks like I got my pages right. Pages 65 is what I usually look at to see what the trends are. It is actually, even though it's kind of in micro font as I'm getting older, it's a really good graphic to kind of show what's happening monthly. We're up in all modes, 4% up in bridge, 7% in bus, and 21 in ferry. Ferry had a really good month. Those of us that have been trending this for a year, I keep going what event happened? There's only 30 days in April. The weather wasn't that great. So something's happening. So I don't know if the events in the city, because commute traffic isn't up, but we are actually, I think commute for ferry has gone up considerably this month. So someone tell me if there's a concert I missed, but it's looking really good. You can see in the spring, we've really had positive numbers all the way through. And again, it's actually, I'm doing actual to actual because budget to actual was something we predicted last February.
Any questions on this one? Why don't you roll through the other?
Item 10. This is to show you on page 71. We talk about what is your cash flow looking like, your revenues over expenses. 800 and, less than $1 million negative from a cash flow perspective, and that's year to date. So that's all to say that we are looking good on cash flow. So as we're trying to operate within our means, I do anticipate that number to go up. Joe would say the same thing too on last quarter spending, just kind of what happens on paying all our bills. But we are looking good and steady on that. That brings us to item 10B. This is your capital program financial statement. I don't really have any. It's looking pretty much like last month. I don't have any comments on that unless there are questions.
Any questions on any of what you just heard? Director Maston.
Would the ferry increase be because of baseball season starting?
No, I think it's really large for community. Yeah, large for communities just going gangbusters. They're sending out, if you don't get the alerts, they're like, come early, get your seat.
Thank you. I think one of those columns should be the Giants' one loss for that month. See how it works.
Yeah, the Giants, and last year I didn't think they were that great, but we had record numbers. So we're hoping again this year.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, all of accounting staff, and pulling all this together. Thank you so much for the explanation, and look forward to getting it, diving in deeper as we go forward and adopting the budget. So with that, I think we are at public comment. Is there anyone around?
We have no speakers for this meeting.
We
have people on the line, but they don't.
Okay.
Okay.
So that I'll look to my colleagues for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion, second, and we are adjourned.